So we can now move on to the next speaker. And just as a reminder, if you have any questions, you can use the chat button. You can find this on the top right of your screen, next to the hand up. You have to press the chat button, and you can then ask questions to the chat option. Okay. So we can move to the next speaker. Our next speaker is Jón Björn Skúlason. So Jón Björn is from the Icelandic New Energy, and he will talk about hydrogen trucks in Iceland, the next step. So Jón Björn, whenever you're ready, the screen
is yours. You see my slides now?
Yes.
So good morning, everybody. My name is Jón Björn Skúlason. I'm the General Manager for Icelandic New Energy. We're a member of the huge project. We're also a member of the Nordic activity called Next Wave, supported by Nordic Innovation, which is also dealing with hydrogen truck and activities in the Nordic countries. So I'm going to briefly talk about the vision here in Iceland. Why isn't I'm not getting my next slide? So in Iceland, we started demonstrations already in 2003. We had 3 fuel cell buses and the world's first commercial hydrogen refueling station. This is some long time ago, and unfortunately there was not a direct continuance between 2003 and present. I think most of us know why that happened, and the development was a bit slower than we hoped for. Today we have actually 2 hydrogen refueling stations in operation and a small fleet of vehicles through the Hydrogen Mobility Europe project, H2Me. We produce all the hydrogen for those stations at a geothermal power plant at Helliseiði, and there we use actually nighttime electricity for all the production. So this is all a green hydrogen solution. The government policy for emission reduction is quite ambitious. There is a certain target which Iceland has to reach through the Paris Agreement, but the government has actually raised that goal for 2030. And as some of you know, today there is almost no emission from electric production or any other industry than transport. So almost all our fossil fuel use is by land transport and maritime activities. This means actually that we have to do a drastic reduction in use of fossil fuels in transport and maritime activities. And we have been extremely successful with battery electric vehicles. At the present, around 50% of all new sold cars in Iceland have a plug. So they're either pure battery electric or they have a plug-in hybrid. However, passenger vehicles can never alone fulfill Iceland's ambitious climate targets. Actually, I added this picture also. This is from a walk a few days ago. This is a volcano putting out quite a bit of CO2, which is still ongoing in Iceland, but that's a different topic. As I said before, all the energy use is based on renewable energy, and we are actually one of the global leaders in providing zero emission vehicle incentives. People tend to forget or connect all these zero emission incentives to Norway, but it actually started in Iceland quite some time ago. There is no VAT on zero emission vehicles, and we have a 24% VAT on everything. So there is quite a bit of incentive for anybody who buys a battery electric vehicles. There is almost no annual tax. There's free parking and etc., just to name a few. Still, these incentives have a very little impact for larger vehicles. They are in the VAT system, so they get the VAT refunded. And if you look at the picture below, you can see that there is considerable emission coming from trucks, vans, and equipment. It's about 23% of Iceland's total transport emission. So this is a segment which is very important to address, and we have to find solution how to implement such vehicles in much larger scale than we have done so far. National funding is now being provided to stimulate projects in other categories than passenger vehicles. Until now, almost all the funding from the government has been towards battery electric vehicles, and that is almost all aimed towards passenger vehicles. But of course, we have small introduction of battery electric vans at the moment. The funding for 2021 is relatively low, but we are hoping, and there is a discussion to triple that funding in the national, depending on the national budget for 2022. And then we foresee that we can actually subsidize or support projects with bigger vehicles. And we're hoping some of the money for 2021 will also go that pathway. And this could be a potentially match funding towards Nordic funding or European funding. But there are also incentives in place today for larger vehicles. The annual tax, which has been revoked from zero-emission vehicles, also apply for larger vehicles, so that's a considerable incentive. And then we have a very special incentive that we can depreciate zero-emission vehicles 125% in year one. So most other vehicles are depreciated 20% per year. So this is actually a reduction of income tax for companies when you can actually depreciate more than the value of the vehicle. Zero-emission buses carry no VAT, but in general other buses carry VAT. So that's a considerable incentive for the potential to substitute the bus fleet. And currently we actually have over 10% of the conventional bus transport system in Reykjavik based on battery electric buses. And then we have vans below 5 tons. They will carry no import duties. Today, fossil fuel vans carry about 13% non-refundable VAT. So for the smaller segment, there is also an incentive. But then through our discussion with the different transport companies, we have realized that this is not enough to actually make them move, because as many of you know, the vehicles are quite expensive. So we are currently lobbying for the government to provide increased incentives, and we've suggested a few, for example, to subsidize long-haul trucking on zero-emission vehicles. We have a system today where companies placed far away from export harbors can actually apply for financial support from the government. So we are now suggesting that this could be used for zero-emission trucking and to stimulate customers to demand a zero-emission truck. We have a fairly high road tax, or in Icelandic called þungaskattur, means, and we have asked that for zero-emission trucks, this tax would be eliminated, and that would have quite a substantial impact on the TCO. We could even focus these incentives towards trucks that drive a long distance. That would have the largest impact on CO2. We're also suggesting increased funding in general for subsidizing trucks and infrastructure. It's complicated to build both at the same time. And as we know, we're potentially just putting in a small fleet of vehicles in the beginning. So the business case for the infrastructure is not very good. And then, of course, CO2 emissions should be included in all governmental tenders, for example, for road and building and constructions and etc. And the price of CO2 must be quite high so that it will have a big impact that those who get the tenders will provide zero-emission trucking. We have no confirmation that all of these suggestions will be implemented. We are pushing the government to do so. There is an election this autumn, and we sincerely hope that some of these incentives will be included, because that will pave the road for zero-emission trucks in general. And then the government has now decided to initiate the work on a roadmap for electrofuels in Iceland. This is now being conducted and it should be ready later this year. And we are quite certain that this will include a large segment on trucks and maritime aspects. But as you see on this map, it's not very complicated to build infrastructure for hydrogen trucks. The ring road is only about 1,400 kilometers. And distances between key hubs is maybe somewhere between 200 and 300 kilometers. However, we have to remember that most of these roads are crossing mountains, and these are quite heavy roads in the wintertime with snow and etc. So even though the distance is maybe 200 to 400 kilometers between main hubs, battery electric trucks might have a trouble to get in between all of these locations without quite substantial infrastructure for charging. But we also have to keep in mind, even though it says there we can use one station at these different locations, Then, of course, redundancy is very important. We can't just build one pump, and then if a station fails, the trucks are out of fuel and can't continue. So that has to be kept in mind. There is a considerable discussion on Power-to-X in Iceland. There's a lot of interest for export, and many companies are now discussing with the utilities in Iceland to actually start a large-scale hydrogen production. If this happens, of course, we'll get a large-scale hydrogen production in place, and that means a much cheaper source of hydrogen, which impacts then the use of direct hydrogen for trucks, buses, vans, even taxi rental companies, and of course, the maritime aspects if we deploy direct hydrogen into ships. And then, of course, we would then produce some electrofuels, ammonia, synthetic methane, methanol, blue crude, which could both be used as fuel for Iceland and or be exported. So actually to build such a Power-to-X applications that would support the hydrogen basis for Iceland to access to reach the economies of scale. But we need to act now. It takes, as most of you know, 1 or 2 years to actually get projects into place. You could see from the slides from Alan that at the pace they're doing it at the moment, it could take 200 years to replace the total fleet. And we realized with battery electric vehicles that we imported the first OEM-produced battery electric vehicles in 2009, and there were 15 battery electric vehicles in Iceland in 2014. So that took 5 years to go from 3 to 15. So if we want to start replacing trucks, we have to start now. It's very important to build the infrastructure, maintenance, training of staff. This is all necessary before commercialization. It's impossible to just start with a big fleet. We have to do all the training, and we've learned that through the current operation, even though there's a small vehicle fleet. We don't see the climate targets being reached by the government if heavy-duty equipment is not put into place. We are quite certain that these simple incentives in the onset of implementation can prepare a full commercialization within 5 to 10 years. And few countries can guarantee that all the hydrogen produced is from renewable sources. And with economies of scale, I don't think many places can offer as cheap hydrogen as we would be able to do. So this is what we would like to do. So it's good that the OEMs are next in line to speak. And I sincerely hope they are ready to start delivering vehicles to us, because that's what we need. And as you can see, this is not the future, like this picture shows, this is not the future of trucking. Thank you very much for your attention.